Hey, how you doing today? I am Tequila Coleman. In today's video, we're going to talk about not being unequally yoked with unbelievers and how this applies to your prodigal spouse. Because for some of you, you are still in contact with your prodigal spouse. You're still talking to them. You're still answering their calls. You're still texting them back. You might even still be sleeping with your prodigal spouse, and you're wondering why you are coming up under heavy spiritual warfare. You're wondering why it seems like God isn't answering your prayers. And so we're going to talk about this because when we talk about not being unequally yoked with unbelievers, another way of saying this is divine separation, right? Divine separation is a term that I use. But if you want to find where does God, talk about divine separation in the Bible, here it is. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. God clearly gives us instructions on who we are to yoke ourselves with and who not to yoke ourselves with, right? So let's talk a little bit more about this. So 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, it says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? What does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols, right? Now, I wanted to read it first. Now we're about to break this all the way down. Okay. So let's go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. We're going to start at verse 14. It says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? So let's start right there, right? So it's telling us don't yoke yourself with an unbeliever. And then it asks the question, what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? So, what is wickedness? According to the concordance of the Bible, wickedness is contempt and violation of law. Whose law? God's law, this Bible. So, wickedness is contempt and violation of law. Wickedness is also iniquity. Another definition in the concordance of the Bible of wickedness means the condition of without law because ignorant of it and because of violating it. So basically, whoever doesn't keep God's laws, whoever is violating God's law, this is who God considers to be wicked. Okay. And again, iniquity, that's another that falls up under wickedness as well. Now let's take a look at some scriptures. Revelation chapter 21, verse 8. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexual immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars. So these are the individuals who fall up under wickedness. Okay. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19. Um, let me turn to it right quick. Let me pull up my blue letter Bible, and let's go to Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 19. It says, there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. Okay. All of these things are wickedness, okay? Because these individuals who operated this way are breaking God's law. They are violating God's law. God hated. It said these are detestable to God. So these are things that God hate, okay? Um, so I just wanted to give you some scriptures so that you can begin to identify and see, like what is it that God considers to be wickedness. So if your prodigal spouse is lying. Okay, let's just start there. If you find any lying going on in your prodigal, it goes right back to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? What do truth have in common with lies? You don't have anything in common with it, right? So if you see any of these things that I just mentioned show up and manifest in your prodigal, this is God letting you know, don't yoke yourself with this person. Get away from this individual. Okay. Now, it goes on to say, this scripture goes on to say, let's go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. But we're gonna continue to read. It says, so do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? So let's start right there. What fellowship can light have with darkness? Let's see. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, it tells us, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. Okay. Romans 1:18. Romans chapter 1, verses 18. Let me pull this up because I didn't write the other verse. So Romans 1, chapter 1, starting at verse 18. Let's see. All the way down to 32, baby. Okay. Let me just write that down. So Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32. I want you to read the whole thing because I'm just going to pull out some of the things that it's saying in here. Okay. Remember the question. What fellowship can light have with darkness? So what do God consider to be darkness? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11 tell us to take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. So darkness is bearing no fruit, right? Can we agree? Okay. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, it talks about people who operate in darkness suppress the truth by their wickedness, right? They know God, but not to glorify him as God, nor give thanks to him, right? People who operate in darkness, their thinking becomes futile, empty, vain, foolish, and their foolish hearts were darkened or are darkened, right? So, and you will see this. This is how scripture say you would know them by their fruit. So whenever you're dealing with your prodigal spouse, if you see any of these things, they suppressing the truth. So they know what God said, but yet they suppressing it. Their fruit is showing, okay? If their thinking is foolishness, that's a fruit. Okay. Another one is sexual impurity. That's the works of darkness. It goes on to talk about how these individuals exchange the truth of God for a lie. They worship and serve created things. God would give them over to shameful lust. Okay, so they would be inflamed with lust, all because of them suppressing the truth. Okay. um these individuals reject knowledge from God, okay? And we already know, according to Proverbs, whenever you reject God's instruction, poverty and shame is your portion, okay? They also operate with a depraved mind. So this is how you would know if your prodigal spouse has a depraved mind. They do what ought not to be done. That is how you know this individual is operating with a depraved mind. They are doing things they know they're not supposed to be doing. Okay. They are filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity, envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice, gossip. They gossip, slanderers, God haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent ways of doing evil, disobey their parents. They senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless, and they approve of others who do these things. So if you see any of these things showing up in your prodigal spouse, again, scripture is telling us, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Don't yoke yourself with this prodigal spouse, because if you do, you're going to learn their ways. If you yoke yourself with your prodigal is going to draw you away from your God to now serving their God. They're going to draw you away from righteousness and into darkness. Do you understand this? And let me just say this. When you go on still, because a lot of you are just disobedient, even when you see these things operating in your prodigal spouse and you ignore it, you tell yourself, oh, God's still working on them, and you still continue to interact with them, I need you to understand that you are in disobedience to the instructions of the Lord. And what's going to happen? Poverty and shame shall be your portion. You're activating a law in your life according to your actions. Okay. Um, let's go back to Second Corinthians chapter 6. Let's continue to read. Let's start at verse 15. It say, what harmony is there between Christ and Belial, right? So basically that's highlighting, there's no harmony between, there's no comparison between Christ and these other gods, okay? So that's basically what that's saying. It goes on to say, what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Let's start right there. What does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? So, unbelievers are, well, let's start right here. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. It say the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. The God, Satan, of this world, we know Satan is the God of this world, has blinded the minds of unbelievers. Scripture also tells us to not do not conform to the patterns of this world. So we can identify unbelievers. Those are unbelievers are those who have conformed to the patterns of this world. Okay? Unbelievers are darkened in their understanding. Because of their ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. Read Ephesians chapter 4, verse 18. Now I want us to take a look at some more scriptures. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. It said the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ. Okay, so we already talked about that. Okay, let's go to, oh no, that's the wrong scripture. First Corinthians. First Corinthians chapter 5. Let's start at verse 9. We're gonna read 9 through 13. It said, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexual immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy and the swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. But now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or a slanderer, a drunkard or a swindler. Do not even eat with such people, right? So this is kind of confirming the same thing that I just talked about, you know, when I was going over the wickedness, right? So he's like, don't even eat with these people. Let's go to First Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. Let me pull it up. It says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Don't even associate yourself with people who are bad company, because it will corrupt your character, your good character. Okay? First Timothy. Let's go to First Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. It say anyone who does not provide for their relatives and especially for their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So if your prodigal spouse has children they are not providing for, again, that is not the time for you to be trying to stick by their side. This isn't the time for you to be, trying to work with your spouse and try to help them get back on track. No, this individual is worse than an unbeliever. Okay? Hands off. Give that spouse over to the Lord. Okay? Let's go over to Hebrews. Where is that? Hebrew chapter 3, verse 12. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you have a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. So unbelievers don't keep God's commandments. Oh no. I'm going ahead of myself. I'm looking at the next scripture. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 12. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. Okay? Let me give you some more scriptures. John chapter 14, verse 15. John chapter 14, verse 15. It say, if you love me, keep my command. See, believers keep God's command because they love God. Unbelievers don't keep God's commandments. This is how you will know them by their fruit. Okay? Now, some of you have prodigals that are pastors, prophets, teachers, apostles, etc., etc., bishop, right? And you're looking more at their title versus their fruit. Even though your prodigal is a pastor, bishop, whoever, are they keeping God's commandment? Because according to scripture, it's a John chapter 14, verse 15, if you love me, keep my command. So if your prodigal spouse, who is also a pastor or a bishop or minister or whoever, if they are saying out of their mouth, I'm a man of God, I'm a woman of God, I love God, and they all up in God's house preaching, but you don't see them keeping God's commandment, that is telling you something right now. Unbelievers don't keep God's commandments, and we are not to be equally yoked with unbelievers. Okay? Hebrews, let's go to Hebrew, chapter 11, verse 6. It says, and without faith, it is impossible to please God. So anyone who is faithless, God is like, don't associate yourself with them. Don't yoke yourself with them. Okay. Now, let's go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, and let's continue to read verse 16. Let's start at verse 16. It says, what agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? Okay. So to sum up this whole thing right here, basically God is telling us, do not yoke yourself with any of these individuals who show what I just mentioned. Okay, it's more. I just didn't go as deep. It's more. Okay. You have to understand, as long as your prodigal spouse is showing you that they still a prodigal, you are to release them to the Lord. Just pray for them. That's all you got to do. You don't have to worry about them. You don't got to try to figure out what stage is my prodigal spouse in. Don't worry about that. Release your prodigal to the Lord, because Lord, I'm talking about the Lord, because the Lord knows exactly how to deal with his prodigal. When you read the prodigal son story, when the son asked for his inheritance, the father gave it to him and he let his son go. You didn't read how the father was still interacting with the son, was still accepting the son's phone call, was still reaching out. You didn't read any of these things. The father gave him what the son asked for. The son went to the left, the father went to the right, and the father stayed in prayer. That is how you are. That is how you are to operate. Give your prodigal spouse over to the Lord. Take your hands off. Stop talking to them. Stop yoking yourself with them, only for you to be the one who end up getting hurt. Only for you to, think about it. Each time you interact with your prodigal, it causes you to, doubt God. It causes you to think, maybe I heard wrong. No, you heard right. You're dealing with a prodigal. And as long as you keep on interacting with them, you're going to continue to be up and down in this God ordained love story. So you have to ask yourself, which God will you serve? Are you going to continue to be disobedient to the Lord's instruction? Or are you going to release your prodigal to the Lord and just stand by faith, knowing that if God said it, it is so, knowing that, nothing is impossible with God. God said he going to restore my prodigal. I'm believing it and I'm standing by faith with it, right? Hands off. Stop answering their call. Stop texting back. Stop having sex with your prodigal. Stop and release your prodigal to the Lord, okay? So that is it. I am Tequila Coleman. I'll talk to you all real soon. Take care.